I've been meaning to do this video for a while, and I figured we would go ahead and knock it out now. I want to talk about my most used prototypes. I've got them all, save the new ones, maxed out. I haven't leveled them all up yet, but there are a few standouts, and I thought I would go through and talk about like which ones I'm using the most frequently and why. I'm not going to talk much about these because obviously I'm using these. If you have access to these, you're probably using them. Prism Amulet is insane. We all know. Healing Horn's pretty good. This one's for summoners, so obviously use it when you have summoners. And then between Ring of Greed and Solar Flare, they're both solid. If there's a bunch of enemies, Solar Flare is going to be the way to go. I think Ring of Greed otherwise is great for, teams it fits. But I'm not going to go into a bunch of detail about him because if you've got him, you're probably just using him across the board, right? Especially if you're progressing and you've snagged one from like one of the events where you can get one for free. So anyway, let's come down here and talk a little bit about which ones I'm using the most often and why. Pain Rune is among my most used for sure. I use it in Arena. I use it in conjunction with Prism Amulet and Godier, and then the new commander. I can't remember his name, but he looks like Krisk. You know who I'm talking about, the turtle dude. I've been using him more than Godier lately. But Pain Rune is just really good. When a shield explodes, when an assassin or vanguard hero loses a shield, the shield explodes, inflicting AoE damage as well as a stun. That's just crazy strong when you pair it with other things. So obviously the commanders that are giving shields are great. There's another prototype we're going to talk about that I pair it with that makes it even stronger. But Pain Rune is just fantastic. You have to use it kind of specifically. I don't think it's one you can just drop in every single team and be good to go. But if you're using it deliberately, it's just excellent. And if I can ever get rid of this spinning wheel, we'll go talk about the one I use it in conjunction with, which is Flashpoint. Flashpoint was one of the original standouts to me. I always thought Flashpoint looked really interesting, even on its own. I think Flashpoint has a little bit more usability widespread. I think you can use this more often because it just works with a healer and brings more protection, whereas Pain Rune kind of has special mechanics. If there's no shields on your team, Pain Rune's not doing you any good. You know what I mean? Whereas Flashpoint, if you're running a healer, you're probably going to get something out of Flashpoint. What it does is when a healer heals, when a support hero casts a healing skill, the cooldown of their normal skill shall be reduced by 30. That's nice, but what we really want to talk about here is any excess healing thereafter shall be converted into a shield and applied to the healed unit, the effect of the shield version. All right, so basically what it's doing is it's filling up shields beyond any excess heal. So like if their HP's full and you use a heal, it now gets converted into a shield over the top, all right? And it's just, again, very usable everywhere. This is kind of one that you can just kind of plug and play everywhere. You don't have to use it in conjunction with anything other than a healer, really, okay? It does have to be used with a healer, but it's really, really good. But in conjunction with Pain Rune, you can see why it would be so beneficial, right? Now, on top of any shields that are getting cast, any shields you're getting from your commander, now any excess healing is also getting turned into shields. So you've constantly got shields, pretty much, right? Which means that the shields are probably constantly getting taken down, which means you're constantly doing AoE damage and landing stuns in a small radius around you. And if you're running multiple vanguards and assassins, then it's pretty chaotic, right? So Pain Rune, excellent, but has to be used kind of specifically. Flashpoint, excellent, doesn't really have to be used that specifically, but when used specifically, highly elevates what else you've got going on, all right? Beyond that, we've got Flowing Rune here is one that I've become really fond of lately. When an allied energy or hunter hero inflicts damage to 3 or more enemies at the same time, they recover 200 energy. That's a lot of energy. That's a lot of energy. For there to be no cooldown or anything, just when they hit 3 or more enemies. So someone like my Ravenna, for example, who I'm a big fan of, she gets a lot out of Flowing Rune. It's really, really good. It's good in Kansara Marsh. It's good in, the Twilight Lands energy stage. It's really good. When we had that event during Christmas where there was the one that was AoE champs and there was all the enemies. Flowing Rune is fantastic in there, obviously. It's really, really good. Again, kind of has to be used specifically, and you've got to be careful. You can't just use it every time you use energy heroes, because there's not always going to be 3 or more enemies. There was one Twilight Land stage I did recently where energy, I don't remember why I was using maybe my main team had died and I was using something else, but there were only it was only Oak and someone else left. And Flowing Rune was in my slot and I caught it before I started the fight. But it would have done me no good there because there was never going to be 3 or more enemies. It was only Oak and one more enemy who didn't summon anything. So you have to be kind of careful about how you use it. You need to be sure that there's going to be ample opportunity to hit 3 or more enemies and that you're running champs that do that, right? The more AoE, the better here because they're just going to be pumping out ults constantly, all right? So Flowing Rune's really good. Just be aware. It's not one you can drop everywhere. You need to make sure there's going to be enough enemies on an ongoing basis to really get the most out of that, okay? Dark Summit is really, really, really cool. Particularly shines for me in Twilight Lands. Well, there's a couple places it shines. Twilight Lands, it's really good for the single target boss, depending on who you're running. And then if I'm not mistaken, let me double check to make sure this is true. I believe I use it on my Disa team. I do. I use it on my Disa team as well. It's really slick, all right? So what it does, when an allied assassin or hunter hero inflicts a crit, they shall have a 30% chance to inflict bonus damage that is equal to 3% of their max HP and up to 360% of the user's attack. If you're running champs that you focus crit heavily on, where this is constantly going off, it is a lot of extra damage over the course of a fight, especially over the course of a fight like Twilight Lands that's going to last longer. This will so significantly increase your damage over the course of a longer fight, especially on someone like Taylor, Bot Mark II, Bailey, who you should have a pretty reasonable amount of crit on. Champs like that are definitely getting crit hits on a regular basis. This is huge. This will, again, very, very significantly ramp your damage up, all right? Praying Eyes I like, but it's kind of started to get overshadowed for me by some other ones. I like the broadness of it. I like that it applies to just about everyone on the team. Energy, Hunter, Assassin, or Vanguard. When they inflict a crit with a basic attack, increases their attack by 36% for 6 seconds. That's a long time, and that's a lot of attack, but it can only trigger once every 10 seconds, which means there's going to be, that 4-second window. It's good. Don't get me wrong. Praying Eyes is solid, but I just kind of feel like it gets outshined. Usually I can get away with using Flowing Rune. I'm in a situation where I can use Flowing Rune. Or again, now I have these, so Praying Eyes has kind of fallen back a little bit, but it's still pretty solid, okay? It's definitely not a slouch. Astral Strike. We don't use tanks much, so we don't get much out of them. This one, I do believe has some potential. I do believe this one has some potential. I haven't experimented a ton with it yet, but I think on champs like Hypnos and Anaruda, I hope I'm saying that right, the additional 1.5 seconds potential there for like stuns and stuff, I think is really, really huge. I think particularly for Arena, this could shine, but it would depend very heavily on the comp. I have not done ample testing with it yet to feel confident about it. It's still speculation, but I do believe it's good. I've used it a little bit in some PvE, like in Soul Mine and stuff. When I use Hypnos, I think he's a great candidate for it. If you're running a crowd control heavy team, I mean, I'm thinking mostly about the stuns. Obviously, there's other debuffs that it's going to be handy to extend, but stuns is what I'm particularly thinking of. I think it's really good, but again, I have to do a little bit more testing with it to really feel confident about it. This one's interesting as like a backup. I think there's better ones to use in this slot, but like in Galactic Arena, I get a little bit out of it, and then again in Twilight Lands, I'm not Twilight Lands, Ancient Altar. I may have said Twilight Lands a few times when I meant Ancient Altar. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I did that or not, but I might have. So I feel like you know what I meant, though, if I did do that. So my bad. Hopefully I didn't do it. If I did, I feel like you know what I meant. I meant Ancient Altar, though. So like it's good for me there. Galactic Arena. It's not my first choice, but I think it's pretty decent. When an allied hero sustains crit damage from the enemy, all heroes shall recover 3% of their max HP. This effect should only be triggered. So actually, I take that back. I guess only in Galactic Arena do I use this one. I forgot it was a crit damage thing. The PvE environment is not going to be landing crit hits on you. So, Galactic Arena is about the only place I use it. It's okay. It's still not my first. All the other things I said about it are true, but not my first choice. Because again, there's other ones that are my first choice. And then these I haven't done a ton with. These two I don't know much about yet, so I'm not going to talk much about them. I think they're relatively new. They must be new. There's no reason I wouldn't have them maxed. I have everything else maxed, so they must be new. And then the other ones haven't stood out much to me. I haven't done much with them yet, so maybe they're good and I don't know yet. But the big ones for me up here are Pain Rune, Flashpoint, Dark Summit, Flowing Rune, and then Temporal Beetle I think has a lot of potential. And then there's not as many down here that I find as interesting. Power Word Pain is one that I was a real big fan of for a long time. When an allied energy or hunter hero hits 3 or more enemies at the same time, they gain an additional damage dealt by their energy skill until the end of the battle. I think this is fantastic. It's really, really good. That damage ramp up, especially with someone like Ravenna, is killer. Obviously, again, you have to use it kind of like the way I talked about using Flowing Rune. I just kind of think, what is going on? I just kind of think that Flowing Rune, I like the ult cycling better than I do the damage bump. But again, this is no slouch of a prototype. So it's definitely usable. It would be interesting to do some specific testing, one versus the other, and see what kind of impact they have, because ultimately if it stacks up to 3 times and it lasts till the end of battle, that's 90% damage, an additional 90% damage dealt by their energy skill. So it might outperform Flowing Rune, honestly. We'd have to test it and see. Maybe I'll do that soon. But I'm a big fan of Power Word Pain. And then Bloodlust I think is pretty interesting. When an allied energy, hunter, assassin, or vanguard hero kills an enemy, the user's attack shall be increased by 30% for 10 seconds. This is, again, I think Bloodlust is a really good one as well for something like that event we had during Christmas, where there's a lot of enemies and you're just constantly getting kills, so that this basically never turns off, right? I think it's best suited for something where there are a lot of enemies, a lot of squishy enemies to be getting kills regularly. I think that's where Bloodlust is particularly going to shine. Beyond that, I'm not real sure. Because in certain situations, in Arena, for example, it's kind of difficult for this to shine enough to use it over other prototypes. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I think specifically for the events, for that particular event where there's a bunch of squishy enemies, it's great. Beyond that, I'm not sure. And then Coronate is one of my favorites. I think Coronate is excellent. I have only stopped using it as much because I have Healing Horn, and Healing Horn is kind of a better version of Coronate. But Coronate is really, really, really good. I think it's worth probably being one of the first ones you max out if you're able to. It's definitely worth the resources to take to 60. But I would focus this one. If you're newer and progressing and you start to get those things where you can select a prototype and you don't have a maxed out Coronate, I would max out Coronate. It's really, really solid. It just increases the healing of your supports by 25%. And then if the HP of a healed unit is lower than 30%, the healing effect should be increased by another 50%. It just takes the weight off of your healer's shoulders so much. It makes it so much easier to have your healers be a real force on your team. You know what I mean? It's so much harder for the enemies to out damage your healing with Coronate, because again, the 25% base boost And then if your team is like in danger, then the healing gets boosted by another 50%. It's just huge. You'll notice it. You'll notice the difference in the health bars moving when healing skills happen if you're using Coronate. It has a big impact. It's killer for progression. And then again, if you don't have Healing Horn, it was my go-to in just about everything I was doing, especially when I'm using like Serena or something. It was my go-to before I got Healing Horn. Beyond that, there's not a lot of the purple ones that have stood out enough to me to make me truly interested. And then there's a couple blue ones that I thought were a little bit interesting. Inner Fire, I think, is interesting. Just a base bump in the crit rate of your energy assassins and vanguards by 20% on their normal attack. Inner Fire, I always thought was interesting, but I didn't do much with it. The blue ones, I just don't know if there's much room for, because you're going to get purple ones fairly early. You're going to start to get your hands on purple ones, and then it's really not even going to be that much longer before you start getting gold ones. So there's just not a lot of room for the blue ones. For the most part, maybe there's a sleeper down there that I haven't done anything with, but that's a quick tour of like what I focus on, the prototypes that I use and prioritize when I'm doing things. And hopefully that's enough information about how and where I use them to apply it to your own account. I would be very interested to hear some feedback on some of the prototypes I didn't talk about, because again, I haven't tested them all. There may very well be some really good ones that I'm not using. That's certainly possible. I just realized what's happening. No, never mind. Yeah, you can't click and scroll here. You actually have to click on one of the prototypes. That's like a transparent background, so if you don't, that's annoying. Anyway, that's it. That's a quick tour of my prototypes and how I use them and why. And I am very interested in hearing if you guys are using some that I didn't talk about, or if you're using some of the ones that I'm using them, but using them in a different way or a more specific way. I'd be very interested to hear what you guys have going on with your prototypes as well. Maybe there's something I can incorporate into my routine that will do me some good. And then as I get more copies of these, I'll get more familiar with them. But anyway, that's it. I'm going to get out of here. Appreciate y'all watching. Hope it was, I don't know, fun or useful to some extent. And I'll see you guys later.